Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going way back, exploring the history of Islamic civilization.
A massive topic.
It really is. I mean, where do you even begin?
Well, luckily we have a jumping off point. There's this YouTube video, The History of the Entire Islamic Civilization in 49 Minutes, from the channel Al-Muqaddimah.
49 minutes. Talk about ambitious.
Right. It covers, well, everything, from the Prophet Muhammad to the present day.
So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to pull out those golden nuggets of information, the things that make this history so fascinating.
It's a history that always surprises me. Like, we tend to think of empires rising and falling in isolation. But Islamic civilization was built on interaction, conflict, and cooperation.
Right. Those themes keep popping up, don't they?
Over and over again.
All right, so picture this. The Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, nomadic tribes, trade routes are real crossroads of the world. Then, in 610 CE, along comes the Prophet Muhammad.
And everything changes.
Yeah, I mean, we all know about the rapid expansion of the Islamic Empire after his death in 632. But to me, what's really mind-blowing is how this small group of Arab Muslims within a single generation became rulers of this vast empire.
It's almost unheard of, that speed and scale.
Right, like, boom, suddenly you have the Rashidun Caliphate.
Right, by Abu Bakr, Omar.
These incredible figures, and they just, like, explode outwards from Medina. In less than a century, they control this huge EE territory, Persia, North Africa. They're rivaling the Byzantines, the Sasanians.
Empires that have been around for centuries.
Exactly. So what was their secret weapon? Was it just military strength?
Well, they were incredible warriors, no doubt. Highly disciplined, strategically brilliant.
But there had to be more to it.
Oh, absolutely. For one thing, the timing was perfect. The Byzantine and Sasanian empires, they were already weakened by years of fighting each other.
So they were ripe for the picking.
Exactly. But there's another factor, and this is key. Their message. The early Muslims, they offered unity, equality.
Appealing to people who felt
marginalized.
Yeah.
Oppressed by the old systems.
Yeah, like they had nothing to lose.
And everything to gain.
So it was this combination. Military power, political savvy, and this powerful message that resonated with people. A real recipe for
success.
But we know that rapid expansion can be a double-edged sword. Did any internal conflicts start to emerge during this early period?
Oh, for sure. Even during the Rashidun Caliphate, there were tensions over leadership. Who should succeed the prophet?
Ah, the age-old question.
Right, and those tensions, they would eventually lead to the split between Sunni and Shia Muslims.
A division that still shapes the Islamic world today.
Absolutely. And it's important to understand this split not just as a theological difference,
but also a political one.
Yeah, different ideas about who should lead the Muslim community.
So how did that split actually play out in the years after the Rashidun Caliphate? Was it just straight-up conflict, or?
It was a bit of both. Yeah, the Umayyad Caliphate, which came after the Rashidun, they faced a lot of pushback, especially from Shia Muslims who saw them as, well, illegitimate.
Usurpers.
Yeah, basically. But the Umayyads, they also expanded the empire even further. They consolidated Islamic rule across these huge regions.
So despite the internal struggles, they were still pretty successful.
Very much so. And this is also where we start to see a real blend of Arab and Persian influences. The Umayyads adopted a lot of Persian administrative practices, cultural elements.
Interesting. So they were incorporating what worked from the cultures they conquered.
Adapting and evolving, a classic pattern.
It seems like it. Which brings us to what's often considered the high point of Islamic civilization, the Abbasid Caliphate and the rise of Baghdad. What made this period so special?
Oh, the Abbasids. They overthrew the Umayyads in 750 CE, and they ushered in a golden age that lasted for centuries. Their big move, shifting the capital from Damascus to Baghdad.
Baghdad, baby.
Exactly. And Baghdad quickly became this cosmopolitan hub. Think, a melting pot of cultures and ideas.
A real center of
everything. Science, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, literature, you name it.
Yeah.
The Abbasids were huge patrons of the arts and sciences. They created this environment where knowledge just exploded.
And this is where we get the legendary House of Wisdom, right? The stuff of legend.
The House of Wisdom. More than just a library. It was a hive of activity.
So what was actually going on in there? Paint us a picture.
Imagine scholars from all over the world, Persians, Indians, Greeks, Christians, Jews, Muslims, all working together. They were translating ancient Greek texts into Arabic.
Wow, preserving knowledge that might have been lost forever.
Exactly. And they were making incredible strides in mathematics, developing algebra. algorithms that we still use today,
No way.
pushing the boundaries of astronomy, mapping the stars, building sophisticated instruments. It's mind-blowing how much they achieved.
It's hard to wrap your head around it, right? The sheer volume of knowledge that was being generated in that one place.
It really makes you realize how interconnected the world already was, even back then.
Amazing. But as with all golden ages, they don't last forever. What were some of the things that led to the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate? What brought this incredible period to an end?
Well, that's where our journey continues. But before we move on, think about this. 2/3 of the stars we know have Arabic names.
Really? I had no idea.
It's true. And that's a direct result of the Abbasid era. It shows their passion for knowledge, their contributions to astronomy.
It's a reminder that they weren't just absorbing knowledge, they were adding to it in a big way.
Exactly. They were shaping our understanding of the world.
So as we move on to the next chapter, let's keep that in mind. The Abbasid Caliphate, despite its achievements, wasn't immune to the forces of change and, well, let's just say things were about to get interesting.
So you want to know what happened to the Abbasids?
That's the million-dollar question. It's not like they just vanished overnight.
Exactly. It wasn't a sudden collapse. Think of it more like a slow unraveling.
Yeah.
This gradual fragmentation. You've got internal power struggles, regional governors wanting more autonomy, and then pressure from outside.
A recipe for disaster.
Pretty much. It's almost like, imagine a centrifuge spinning faster and faster.
Yeah.
Eventually, the pieces start to fly off.
Okay, I can see that. So were there any specific groups or events that really sped up this whole fragmentation process?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One group that comes to mind is the Seljuk Turks.
The Seljuks?
Nomadic warriors. They came from Central Asia, migrated into the Middle East. This was in the 10th and 11th centuries.
Okay, so another group coming in from the outside.
Right, but here's the thing. They converted to Islam, and pretty quickly they became a major force within the Abbasid Caliphate. I mean, eventually they actually took control of Baghdad itself.
Wow, so they basically took over from the inside?
You could say that. And it makes you wonder why the Abbasids were so vulnerable to these kinds of challenges.
Right, like were they just not seeing it coming?
It's complicated, but one factor was their reliance on Mamluks.
Mamluks, those were.
Slave soldiers, often Turkic or Caucasian. They were incredible warriors.
Sounds like a risky strategy, relying on a group that could potentially turn on you.
Yeah, you're starting to see the problem. As the Abbasids weakened, these Mamluks, well, they started flexing their muscles. They carved out their own little empires, challenging the central government.
Talk about a power struggle. So the Seljuks, were they happy just being the power behind the throne, or did they have bigger ambitions?
Oh, they definitely had bigger plans. They wanted to expand their power, and they did it very effectively. They pushed west into Anatolia, and that's where they clashed with the Byzantine Empire.
Anatolia, that's modern-day Turkey, right?
Yep. And that clash, well, it led to a pretty decisive battle, the Battle of Manzikert in 1071.
Manzikert. That rings a bell. Didn't that kind of change the course of history?
It's considered a major turning point.
Yeah.
It signaled the beginning of the end for Byzantine power in Anatolia. And guess who steps in to fill that void?
The Ottomans.
Bingo. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because while all this is happening, you've got another major event unfolding.
Oh, yeah. This is when the Crusades start, right?
Exactly. European armies marching east, trying to reclaim the Holy Land.
What an impact that must have had on the Islamic world.
That was huge. On one hand, it was a massive challenge, militarily and politically. Islamic territories, especially along the Mediterranean coast, were lost.
Makes sense.
But there's another side to this story. The Crusades also led to a lot of cultural exchange. Ideas, technologies, goods, flowing back and forth.
So kind of a mixed bag.
Definitely. And the Crusades also contributed to the rise of figures like Saladin.
Saladin, he's like a legend.
He was a Kurdish Muslim leader who fought against the Crusaders. And he's still admired today, known for his military skills and his chivalry.
Right. I've heard stories about his, respect for his enemies, even in battle. Pretty incredible.
Exactly. But while the Crusades were raging in the West, there were other big developments happening elsewhere in the Islamic world. Remember the Ghaznavids?
Refresh my memory.
They were a Turkic dynasty centered in what's now Afghanistan. And during the 11th and 12th centuries, they were expanding their power into northern India.
Ah, okay. So this is the start of the whole Islam-Hinduism interaction in India.
Exactly. A long and complex history that would eventually lead to the Mughal Empire.
Okay, got it. So multiple centers of power developing at this point. The Seljuks, the Ghaznavids, each with their own ambitions. Then, boom, The 13th century hits, and it's like the world is turned upside down.
The Mongols.
Exactly. I mean, how did they impact the Islamic world? I know they were pretty brutal conquerors.
It was catastrophic. Genghis Khan and his successors, they just swept across Eurasia, leaving destruction in their wake. And in 1258, they sacked Baghdad.
The heart of the Abbasid Caliphate.
Gone. Just like that. It effectively ended their political power. And the Mongols, they were known for their brutality. They decimated infrastructure, agriculture, culture. I mean, it was a dark age for the Islamic world.
Wow, it's hard to even imagine the scale of that destruction. But I guess, like with any major event, there were probably some unexpected consequences, right?
You're right. Some historians argue that the Mongol conquests, despite the devastation, also opened up new trade routes across Eurasia.
Ah, so it wasn't all bad?
Not entirely. They also indirectly helped new Islamic dynasties rise, like the Mamluks in Egypt and the Delhi Sultanate in India.
They kind of filled the power vacuum left by the Mongols.
Exactly. They established new forms of Islamic rule, adapting to the New World Order.
So even in the face of incredible destruction, there's this, like, resilience. Tell me more about these new dynasties. How did the Mamluks and the Delhi Sultanate shape Islamic history?
Both played major roles. The Mamluks, remember, they were originally slave soldiers, Turkic origin.
Oh.
They set up a powerful sultanate in Egypt and Syria, known for their military strength.
They were the ones who actually defeated the Mongols, right?
Yes, at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260.
Ain Jalut. Another one for the history books?
It was a pivotal moment. It basically stopped the Mongol advance westward, saved the Islamic heartlands.
What a turning point. And the Delhi Sultanate.
They ushered in a new era in India. They were the first Muslim dynasty to rule a huge chunk of the subcontinent, and their reign lasted for centuries.
Wow, they must have had a major impact.
Oh, they did. They brought significant cultural and political changes, new systems of administration, art, architecture. They faced their share of challenges, of course. Hindu kingdoms pushing back, internal divisions.
Sounds familiar.
Right. But they paved the way for the Mughals, who would come along in the 16th century and create another golden age in India.
Okay, so we're seeing these threads of Islamic history connecting across regions, empires rising and falling, power shifting, this constant interplay of internal and external forces. It's amazing how it all ties together. And then we get to the end of the 15th century, and a new chapter begins.
The age of gunpowder.
The gunpowder empires. Ottomans, Safavids, Mughals, these guys were on another level. They weren't just powerful, they were massive, spanning continents. What I find fascinating is that they weren't Arab-led, but they were still deeply rooted in Islamic traditions.
Right. They became the face of Islamic civilization for centuries.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about these gunpowder empires. What set them apart? How did they come to dominate so much of the Islamic world?
Well, that's a story for our next chapter. But before we dive in, let's just take a moment. Think about everything we've covered, from the birth of a new religion in the Arabian desert to the Mongol conquests. And through it all, you see this incredible resilience, this ability to adapt, to find new ways to express Islamic ideals in a constantly changing world.
It shows that history isn't just a straight line. It twists and turns, triumphs and tragedies. It's a tapestry of different stories.
Exactly. And as we explore the rise of the gunpowder empires, we'll see those themes play out on a grand scale. But for now, let's just savor the richness and complexity of what we've learned.
Wow.
Every event, every character, every idea has shaped this amazing tapestry that is Islamic civilization.
Okay, let's talk gunpowder empires. The Ottomans, Safavids, Mughals, these guys were the heavyweights of their time. Empires that spanned continents. They weren't Arab-led, but they were still deeply connected to Islamic traditions. It's kind of amazing how they became, like, the face of Islamic civilization for centuries.
It really is. It challenges the idea that Islamic history is just, an Arab story.
Right.
Take the Ottomans. They came out of the remnants of the Seljuk Sultanate.
In Anatolia.
Exactly. And they blended all these influences, Turkish, Persian, Byzantine.
A real mix. And then they go and conquer Constantinople in 1453. That had to be a huge deal. I mean, that city had been around forever.
It was a seismic event. It was the end of the Byzantine Empire and the beginning of the Ottomans as a major power.
Wow. I bet that sent shockwaves through Europe.
Oh, absolutely. It fueled all those anxieties about the Ottoman threat. This rising Islamic power right on their doorstep. It really added to that whole East-West rivalry.
Yeah, I can see that. So the Ottomans were making a statement, not just militarily, but symbolically, too.
Oh, totally. They took Constantinople, renamed it Istanbul, and they made it their capital. invested heavily in the city. They even converted the Hagia Sophia, that incredible Byzantine cathedral, into a mosque.
Wow, so they were really embracing Islam as their driving force.
Exactly. But, they weren't the only ones making waves. The Safavids in Persia were also on the rise.
Right, the Safavids. What was their deal? What made them different from the Ottomans?
Well, they were all about Shia Islam. They made it the state religion in Persia.
Oh, so that created a religious divide with the Ottomans, who were Sunni.
Exactly. And that religious difference fueled a lot of conflict between them. It wasn't just about land or power, it was about faith, too.
So it added a whole other layer of complexity to their rivalry. And what about the Mughals in India? They're famous for their incredible architecture, but what else made them unique?
The Mughals were fascinating. They were descended from Timur, also known as Tamerlane, and they established one of the most powerful empires in Indian history. Their founder, Babu, he was this brilliant military leader. He defeated the Delhi Sultanate in 1526.
And that was the start of Mughal rule.
Exactly. But what's really interesting is how they ruled over a mostly Hindu population.
Right, because they were Muslim rulers.
Yep. And Akbar the Great, he was probably the most famous Mughal emperor. He was all about religious tolerance. He married Hindu princesses, incorporated Hindu elements into his court. He even tried to create a new religion.
Right, a new religion?
Yeah, it was called Dini Ilahi. It blended Islam, Hinduism, and other faiths.
Wow. He was way ahead of his time. Sounds like he was trying to bridge those religious divides, something we're still struggling with today. But while all of this was happening, Europe was changing too. They were sailing around the world, building their empires, and starting to encroach on the Gunpowder Empire's territory. How did the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals react to all of that?
It really depended on the empire. The Ottomans, at first, they held their own. They controlled those key trade routes and even expanded their territory. But then in the 18th and 19th centuries, things started to go downhill. They had internal problems, their economy weakened, and they started losing battles against the Europeans.
It's like the tide was turning.
Exactly. And the Safavids, they also had trouble keeping up with the Europeans. They had their own internal conflicts, and eventually they collapsed in the 18th century.
And the Mughals.
Well, they were successful at first, but then internal rivalries, rebellions, and the British East India Company, well, they all chipped away at their power. By the mid-19th century, most of India was under British control. The Mughal Empire was over.
It's amazing how these powerful empires eventually succumbed to these internal and external pressures.
It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires are not immune to change.
So true. And that brings us to the modern era. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the rise of Islam to the fall of the gunpowder empires. What do you hope people take away from all of this?
I hope they see that Islamic history is not just one story. It's incredibly diverse and complex, full of amazing achievements, but also challenges. It's a history that's still unfolding, and I think it's important to engage with it, to understand its nuances, and to learn from its lessons.
Couldn't agree more. It's been an incredible journey, and I hope everyone listening is inspired to keep learning. Dive deeper into the topics that sparked your curiosity, seek out different perspectives, and keep asking those big questions. That's what makes history so fascinating.